There we go. Thank you, Kara.
Sure.
Okay. Any questions? Not any other questions. Any questions about anything? No? We're all happy? Ish? Oh, Ashton, is that a happy thing or you have a question?
That was more of a Jinkui, all is good sort of hand gesture.
Yeah, I have to say, Janine, I was listening to you chatting now about recording yourself, and I think by far Ashton is the worst in the group.
Oh, good. I'm so glad it's not me. Hey.
He's like, he sent me his Parivrtta Trikonasana video, and I could see 1 foot. That was it. Not his head, not his other foot. It was just like, it was a very wide Trikonasana. And I was trying, all I could see were sort of hips and 1 foot.
Truth be told, Catherine, I didn't watch it until after you commented.
There you go. And then Mandana sent me a video where I think if she'd filmed it correctly, it would probably be something she'd post and brag about. She's videoing her handstands and she's videoing her fingers gripping on the floor. And I can't see because she's only videoing her fingers gripping into about here of her arm. And that's it. But it looks like she's balancing. And then I said to her, are you balancing? Because it looks like, she said, yes, I balance, but I can't see it because she's only videoed her fingers and her arm because of the angle. So you guys try a little bit harder, Ash. Although, Ashton, your previous videos have actually been, they were quite punchy, they were quite good.
We'll try keep them all to that standard.
Keep them to that standard. Okay, so let's talk, let's kill this hips level business. Okay, so I got pretty much everybody's Trikonasana and Parivrtta Trikonasanas today, or whenever, over the weekend, a whole load of different times, okay? So what I want to know from you guys is a few things, okay? What happens, first of all, if I do Trikonasana, and I keep my hips square to the side of the mat, what am I going to be feeling in terms of stretch and where?
Lateral flexion.
I don't know who, I think Juliet spoke, she said lateral flexion, yeah. And Juliet, so lateral spinal flexion, you're going to be feeling a stretch on the side, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
If I allow my hips to slightly turn, so like a warrior 1.5, I said in the video, warrior 1.5, where am I going to feel the stretch? I can see people grabbing their inner thighs, Cara, Janine, yeah?
In your hamstrings, like hamstrings in of the front leg for me.
Yes, hamstrings and adductors, pretty much for most people. Okay, so in Parivrtta Trikonasana, so revolved triangle, if I keep the hips level, what happens to my twist, my spinal rotation?
It doesn't happen.
It does to a degree, but not very much. So what's restricting it?
The rotation of your hips.
That's right, yeah. If I allow the hips to rotate, I can definitely turn more. But why is that? Can anybody remember from our last meeting? Martina, are you just doing this or quick hand?
No. The pelvis? Is it the stabilized pelvis?
So we
The rib. With the hip.
And when we move the hips, we move the pelvis, so that allows us to turn and twist more. But what structure is restricting us from twisting if we keep the hips level?
Our spine.
Spine? Where?
The lumbar.
No, your thoracic spine.
No, the lumbar spine, your lower back, okay? So, Colin again. Colin is attached to my top, so hang on, all right? Okay, so Colin, can you all see Colin? All right, can you see, Claire will go through all of this with you. Can you see how big the vertebrae are here compared to at the neck. Okay? Can you see how tiny these little spinous processes are, little things that stick out? Okay? When you look down here, they're huge, right? We can only rotate, turn about this much in the spine. That's in the lumbar spine, I beg your pardon. We can turn heaps up here because we can do this with our heads. We can turn a little bit here, but we can't turn here. So if I can't turn here, how do I twist then?
With your pelvis.
With my pelvis. Okay, so structurally, you can't twist. You can't spinal rotate in the lumbar spine. If this is the lumbar spine, it'll move this much. That's it. Okay, then you can do that. This is what I'm trying to get you guys to understand. You can say hips level, turn and twist, but then expect to stop, right? Here. Okay, if I want to go, but this is no yoga pose. So how much do I have to twist in Parivrtta Trikonasana, in revolved triangle?
You can't.
I can if I allow the hips to move, but how much? If I'm facing forward, I need to go over there to get down to the ground. It's quite a significant amount. It's way more than my lumbar spine allows me to go, right? So I have to allow the hips to twist, okay? There's no option. Even most of you, when you were videoing hips level, you were actually twisting already. You were actually allowing the back hip to come forward a little bit, and then you'd exaggerate and do it a lot, okay? You have to, so I don't know if you all did your Dharma Dog, but let's see if we can guess this. In Trikonasana, who would I have to allow a big hip movement for? What type of person? What restrictions, Janine?
Hamstring restriction.
Hamstrings, okay? So this is the thing. I don't care whether you instruct hips level or moving hips, but you need to know the anatomy of what's going to come from that instruction. And then you need to look at the people that are actually in your room, okay? So most of you here have got crazy flexible hamstrings, right? So you can do a whole load of variations and get to the floor. But the majority of people you teach can't. So if you instruct hips level to somebody with not the most flexible, like crazy flexible, like you guys, hamstrings, then you're restricting them even more from getting to the floor, okay? Because you're going over there, and as you can all feel, I'm sure, Parivrtta Trikonasana is quite a big hamstring move, right, Caro?
Yes, sorry for just presenting you with my profile picture, but the connection is a bit bad here. I hope you can hear me. But I would say, like, allowing the hip forward, not necessarily only people with restrictions. I think also people who have done yoga for a while and have quite open hamstrings, because, for example, I told you this in my video, when I do not allow my back hip to move forward a bit, I actually don't feel anything in the hamstrings of my front leg. I really have to make this movement to get into my hamstrings because it'll take me deeper. So I think it's a nice instruction in general if the hamstrings are your focus in this class.
Yes, it's a bit tricky because it's actually twofold. So people with restricted hamstrings, because we're bringing them into a twist, so it's not just a forward fold, and we're asking them to go further in the twist, in a hamstring twist, we have to allow their hips just to do what they do, right? But it's somebody like yourself, Cara, and most of the people here, we're allowing that back hip to come forward because we go further in the pose. So it's almost as though it takes us to a totally different range of hip flexion, so hamstring movement. It's a little bit tricky because the one thing is allowing restricted people, not restricted, you know what I mean, not so flexible people, to turn and twist. So slightly different. Whereas you guys, you all know when you're in pyramid or those poses, if you allow the back hip to come forward, you actually put more load on the front leg. Does that make sense? So it's not, it makes you feel it more because you are moving forward onto the front leg. So now this is what I wanted to discuss. I hope you all did it. So I asked you to go through long dog and short dog, okay? And coming up onto your toes and all of those things are on the website. So what I want to know from you now is, where do you feel your hamstrings more? Short dog or long dog? Janine?
For me, it's a short dog. If
It's
I'm
a
keeping
short dog?
my heels on the ground.
Tegan?
For me, it is also a short dog, and when I emphasize on turning the sit bones really up towards the ceiling as well as sending the heels down, so that really intensifies the downward dog for me.
All right. So why do you feel hamstrings more in a short dog?
The stance is shortened.
Say again, Tegan, sorry.
The stance is shortened.
So the stance is shortened. So what does that mean? What is that movement? Yes, Eva. So Eva's going like this, squishy for those that can't see her. She's squishing her body together.
Yeah, so it's the hip flexion is getting bigger.
Yes. So hip flexion is you're squishing your thighs to your torso more. So you're coming into more hip flexion. So that means that your hamstrings are going to be more on. So if the classic thing that you see in yoga, and I can see it in almost everybody's Trikonasana here, except one or two of you. Your Trikonasanas, and I'm going to make you play with them this week, are short, like really short. I honestly almost never seen so many short Trikonasanas. Go back and look at your videos and you can see really short Trikonasanas. I'm going to send you a long Trikonasana and then a short Trikonasana. Okay, so if I do a short Trikonasana, why am I doing a short Trikonasana?
To get a hamstring stretch. No.
Why? Forget about why that. Why do most people do short Trikonasanas and short downward dogs?
To be able to get their hand to the floor.
To be able to go in downward dog, it would be your heels to the ground, and in Trikonasana you do it because you can hold your toe, or you can get to the ground because you've made it into a place that you can laterally flex and get to the back. Take it. Oh, she's gone. Okay, so the distances emphasize different things. So when you're in a long downward dog, what is emphasized then? Ava.
It's more the lengthening of the spine.
Definitely more the lengthening of the spine, but where do you feel it? So, Tegan?
I find when I lengthen the downward dog, I feel it a lot more in my lower back and into like the glutes a little bit more, as opposed to just my hamstrings.
Okay, all right. Sandra? And then Janine?
It a lot more in my shoulders.
Yes.
That's it. Okay, that's the answer. All right, so in a short downward dog, and you're going to go and experiment with this, because I can see that you're used to doing things in a certain way, so you're very fixed in make your dog shorter or keep your hips square. So I want you to play with the different variations of it. Nothing's wrong, nothing's right. They're just different, okay? Which links to your peak pose sequencing as well. They're just different, and you've got to understand your body and people's body to understand why they're different. So in a short downward dog, we've said, like Ava said, you know, we're coming into more of a forward bend, right? So we should theoretically feel it more in our hamstrings. Okay, that's what forward bends do. We feel it in our hamstrings, right? If we make the downward dog, sorry, my phone is pinging away. If we make the downward dog longer, think about if you were in a downward dog, and I'm going to make you guys do that. And instead of walking your feet to your hands, walk your hands to your feet. what would happen to the load on your shoulders?
If you walk your hands to your feet, it would be less.
It's be less, right? You know that feeling walking back. So the shorter I make my jog, the less load is on my shoulder. The longer I make my jog, the more load is on my shoulder. Then if I add heels to the ground in a long downward jog, so presuming that you have the capacity to do that, where am I going to feel it in my, not in my shoulders, other bits of my body? Janine?
I feel it in my glutes.
In your glutes. Yeah, you're going to redo this because you guys are mixing stuff up. So Firdaus?
In the calf muscles, I think.
Calf.
If you
Okay, yes, exactly. So think about it if you were creating the shape of the downward dog leg with your hands against the wall, okay? So if I go, hopefully you guys can see me. If I go over here, can you see my feet? Yes, no, nod, can't see it. So if I have my foot here, just normal, there's my ankle dorsiflexion, completely normal, right? 90-degree angle. What happens when I take it far back? Where am I going to get this stretch?
In your calf.
In my calf. Okay? Presuming that you can get your heels to the floor, of course, because if you can't get your heels to the floor and you're up on your toes, you won't feel it in your calf. But heels to the ground, you're going to get the stretch in your calf. Because what has happened to the angle of dorsiflexion, my ankle range? What's happened there? It's got smaller, okay? That's my ankle when I'm standing upright, okay? This is the front of my ankle, that's my foot. When I take it back, it becomes like this. So then you're going to feel a stretch. It's the same thing as Ava was saying with hip flexion. So we're talking about a forward fold. This happens, so then we're going to feel it in our hamstrings. Ava?
And yes, the relationship between the two angles is reciprocal. So the more hip flexion you have in the down dog, the less ankle flexion you have, and the other way around. So it will either go more to your hamstrings if the flexion is a sharper angle, if you've got more flexion in your hip, and you've got you feel it more in your quads, in your calf muscles, the sharper the ankle angle is.
Exactly. Yeah. So what Ava said is she summed it up perfectly. So on the front body, we've got degrees of load. The shorter we make our downward dog, the less load on the shoulder. In the back body, in our legs, the shorter we make our downward dog, so the closer the hip flexion is, the easier it is on our ankles. Taking it the other way around, the longer the downward dog is, the wider, there's your hip flexion there, right? The more the angle of the ankle has got to be, the more stretch in your calves. So the only way of doing this, it can become a bit, but we have to make you go and do it so that you understand that the poses can be done in very different ways for very different reasons. So if you dictate to your class, your downward dog must be short, or everybody, chaturanga, up dog, down dog, and then what commonly happens is people step forward. Yes, Ava?
I think I would even say it includes the third angle, because it's like a triangle, and you have the hip, which could be like more or less 90 degrees, and then both angles would, if you have a same length body to upper body to lower body, it would be 45 degrees in the shoulders and in the angle. And the bigger the angle at the shoulders is, the more load the shoulders take. So it's like a triangle relationship.
Exactly. And you guys don't need to know it in that kind of technical detail. What you need to do is go do it and see what's actually going on. So if you had a class full of people, say brand new beginners, elderly people that had never done yoga before, what downward dog would you choose for them? Group of 55-year-old women like me who've never done yoga before. What would you choose, Janine?
I'm taking a flyer here. I would first of all give them blocks for their hands and make them do a wider downward dog.
Make them do a wider downward dog. Okay, why?
Because they're not putting so much, it depends on their hamstrings.
Yeah,
I can't
there
really
you go.
say it doesn't mean it.
Okay, so what is likely, I'll get you now, Eva, what is likely to be something that they're never going to have done in their life? Do you think they would have forward bended before?
Yes.
Like at home, picking something up. Okay, right? So they may have flexible hamstrings. So that would be the kind of, we'll see how we go with that. So Eva, you wanted to say, and then Caro?
I would probably not have them stand in real wide because they probably not used to having load on their shoulders. So I would have them stand in a shorter version so that they have less load on their shoulders. And if there is a hamstring problem because they are not used to picking up that much from the floor, then they can still bend their knees.
Exactly. So you can kind of fix that. Caro?
Yeah, what Eva said.
Yeah, so that would be a really good way of you going, oh, you know what? I don't want these people's shoulders to sort of niggle quite yet because it's quite strong if I'm going to do a load of downward dogs. But if I make their downward dog shorter, so if it's still confusing for you, then think about downward dogs. If we did a downward dog, like a half downward dog on the wall or a downward dog on a chair. So the load is different, right? So we can play with the load on the shoulders. But I wanted to relate this into, because we're on hamstrings, right? Hamstrings and quads. So I wanted to relate to, if going back, Parivrtta Trikonasana, what pose could I choose as a peak pose that would have Parivrtta Trikonasana as a prep pose, or some version of it as a prep pose?
Twisted half moon, perhaps?
Twisted half moon, absolutely. It's more like a stepping stone to twisted half moon. Yeah, definitely. What else? Firdaus, you saying something? I think I saw you.
Yeah, I just typed it in the box, sorry. Something like a revolved dancers.
Yeah, could be a revolved dances, that type of thing. What about Eva?
I don't know, I don't have a name for it. If you are in down dog and if it's a one-armed down dog and you put your arm, the opposite arm to the opposite leg, so you have the hamstring stretching, you have the rotation, and then you could play with the angle of the down dog as well.
Absolutely, could do that. So we're linking nicely there, okay? And you can see that all of those things are all related as well. So they can all come together as well, just for fun. Okay, so what about an arm balance that has got a twist element and hamstring element? Martina?
Kundiniyasana.
Kundiniyasana, which one?
One.
One, absolutely, one. And what other arm balance? Do we have any other twisted arm balances with straight-ish legs?
Oh, flying, I know. Flying pigeon. Not a twist.
What's
Side crow with straightened legs, maybe?
Sorry, Tara, did you speak? I just saw a movement.
I just said side crow with extended legs.
Side crow with
Exercise.
extended legs. And what else looks like side crow with extended legs but actually needs a little bit more side crow?
The hurdler's pose.
The hurdler's pose, which is what Martina said already. So I'm very bad with modern names. so Ekapada Kundiyasana, one, the twisted hurdler's pose. Yes, that's right. Eva?
Yes.
Ashtavakrasana.
Ashtavakrasana, absolutely. Brilliant prep for that. Firdaus?
That one we did with Laura with the figure 4 where you twist and put your hands on the floor. I don't know what it's called, but you know what I mean? Like you're in a figure 4 and then you twist and get your elbow into the sole of your foot and then your hands on the floor. So you have the twist and your back leg comes up.
Okay, so that I think is probably twisted grasshoppers or grasshoppers. Is that right? Is that what you call it? But now, why would that not work so much? So the twist would be fine, but what is happening to your front leg there? Bringing it back to hips.
It's bent.
It's bent, yes, and it's bent in what way? So what's it doing?
External rotation.
It's doing external rotation, okay? So it's not really involving hamstrings terribly much in the way that they stretch. The back leg is in hip extension, so the hamstrings are definitely working, but they're working to hold that leg up. So it's a different thing, okay? Which, thank you for those, brings me on to hip extension, all right? So what I want to talk to you about are those two things, hip external rotation and hip extension. And I asked you to do Utthita Hasta Padangusthasana, extended leg, nose thing, I don't know what it's called, okay? Standing splits, and if you are able, which some of you are, splits. And I wanted you to look at hips level and hips level, and then with hip external rotation. So what did you find out? Ava.
Yeah, as soon as I allow my hips to externally rotate, I get more deeper in the pose in terms of the extension of the back leg. So I can either in standing splits or in whatever pose as well. Also, if the nose to big toe pose,
Yes.
anytime I externally rotate my leg, I can either backwards or also forwards. I can more easily lift the leg up.
Got more range in the pose. Claire.
I was going to say it's more range, more mobility, but I suppose again, depending on what you're doing in the class, when I have my hips squared, it's getting a deeper stretch in the hamstring and the hip flexor. So I don't feel as deep a stretch when I do the external rotation, but obviously I get a little bit flatter towards the floor.
So which pose are you talking about, Claire?
Sorry, I jumped to the splits.
You went straight to splits, okay. All right. So you're saying you get less stretch in the hamstring if you externally rotate?
Yes.
On the front leg, I'm presuming?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yeah,
so
the back leg is obviously getting into the hip flexor one.
Yeah, so it's a quad stretch at the back, right? We know that, right?
Yeah.
It? Okay, and then at the front, on the front leg, your hamstring. So my question to you is, okay, how far back can we take our leg in hip extension? If I'm standing up and I take my leg back, how far? Sandra?
30 degrees.
30 degrees. So what's 30 degrees? Show me what 30 degrees is, guys. It's like somebody's doing this, somebody's doing this, okay? Cara, that's pretty good. The point is that we know that this is 90, right? So that's 45 degrees, that's 30, okay? But obviously on a bigger scale because it's us, all right? But do you all understand that you can only take your leg back 30 degrees? Does that make sense to you guys? Or not? Because if it doesn't, you need to tell me. Claire, do you have something else to say?
No, sorry, I haven't put my hand
Oh,
down.
no,
There we go.
don't worry. Janine.
Catherine, when I did head to knee to toe, standing up, and you externally rotated your hip and you could get your leg higher, it makes no difference for me at all.
Which may be the case, because that's why I was saying it really does depend on your hip structure, okay? So as a rule, if I go up, I would say it works with maybe 85% of people. If I externally rotate their leg, it will go up higher, because if we go back to Ava's just very astute observation that everything is kind of connected in your downward dog, right? So we look at the, if our hip flexion, this shape, if it's like this, that means the ankle needs to be less like this, okay? So it's all kind of, it's connected in those ways. So if we look at the real absolutes of movement, saying we're talking about hip extension, so we're just taking the leg back, the leg will literally, the leg only goes to here. That's as much as I can take it. Can you all see that? I don't know if I'm on my video. Nod if you can't, or shout, or one of the two.
Tilt it a little bit here.
Okay, how about this? Okay, straight up. That's as much as I can take my leg back. That's it. Okay. If I'm talking about abduction, so we're talking about Utthita Hasta Padangusthasana, that's it. I cannot take my leg any further, and neither can most of you. All right. These are the absolute movements. So if I want to then get my leg into the crazy yoga poses that we do, I have to add different movements to add onto it. Does it make sense? So in Utthita Hasta Padangusthasana, abduction, which is just taking your arm out to the side, we know with abduction, the shoulder can just go up, right? But with the hip, it just goes, it literally, okay, there's your socket, there's the top of my leg, the ball goes in the socket. When I take it up to the side, it crashes, okay? This thing, this is called the greater trochanter, don't need to know it, right? There's my socket, okay? When I take the hip up, the leg up to the side, the bone hits the bone. So I therefore cannot take it up anymore like this. So then what I do, and it works for most people, is I externally rotate. Can you see I'm turning backwards? We all know that feeling, right? You're kind of turning it backwards a bit. And the greater trochanter, this thing, this is the, you know, it works differently with everybody, gets out of the way, and then I can take my leg up more. Does that make sense? Okay, so the one is like this, crash. The other one is, ooh, I'm just taking, I'm rolling it back a little bit, to use a very bad description, but it's external rotation. I'm taking the knobbly bit away from the socket, okay? I'm just doing this. So then I can take it up in abduction again, but I've just added another movement, okay? So it's almost physiologically impossible for anybody to take their leg up like this. Look, with Colin, you saw his sockets like that, right? So we have deep sockets like that, right? And we have really shallow sockets. And those are the dancers of the world, right? The shallow sockets. But even with shallow sockets, I hate this thing, right? Even with shallow sockets, you can see the minute I take the leg up, it's going to go further, but it's still only going to go to 90 because it's going to hit the bone. So somehow we have to find the range of external rotation to take it up higher. Does that make sense? Yes? No? Are we sure we all understand this? Yeah? And it's the same thing. So there's all these different movements that are our friends. And hip flexion, external rotation, hip extension, external rotation in the hip is a big friend, okay? So when we go back, so now imagine, if you remember from the video, when we take our leg back, not only do we hit bone on bone almost immediately, the ligaments, and I think I did it really badly in the video, I haven't watched the videos for a while, okay? The ligaments that are holding our leg in place actually become tight, right? Like a towel. As we take the leg back, they do this and they become tight. They actually stop us from taking the leg back. So if we want to take the leg back in splits, unless you've got a really, really unusual body, and it's very rare, you have to allow external rotation. And what else do you have to allow in splits? What else is happening to help you? What other bit of the body is working to help you create that range? The dead.
And the tilt of the pelvis, if I'm not mistaken.
The tilt of the pelvis, yes, on which side? Tricky. Janine, are you answering?
The back leg.
On the back leg, okay? So when you look at most people in splits, and it's in the video, you'll see that they hike up their hip, okay? They almost twisted in the spine, to get, unless they just like would even actually, there's a picture, I think, in that video of a gymnast who's got her front foot up on a bench. She's like this in splits. And she's still using external rotation of the back hip, and she's pulling up, hiking up her hip, because all of these movements get us into a shape, okay? So when would you say in yoga, keep the hips straight forward? Janine, for those?
Go for those.
Well, I had an answer and a question, so maybe Janine wants to go first.
You can go. It's fine.
Keeping the hips straight forward when you want to fold forward, I would imagine. But can I ask my question or not?
Of course you can.
Wait, I just wanted to ask, we also have a range of external rotation, right? So there would be a point where you'd have to stop and then you just couldn't go any further.
Absolutely, and it's that classic thing where we can't, like yoga teachers often cue one, they're normally restrictive cueing, but they're like hips forward or allow your hips to move, or all of those things, but they don't take into account all of those other things that follow. So we can say externally rotate the leg. I mean, you can't say that in a yoga class, nobody would understand what you're talking about, okay? You can say externally rotate the leg, but then at the same time, we've got to think, oh, there's going to be an abduction restriction, external rotation restriction, and our hamstrings are going to come and shout at us. We're talking Utthita Hasta Padangusthasana, right? We all know pretty much you're going to get to a point, either the bone is going to come and go, ah, or your hamstrings are going to go, ow, ow, ow. Let's take something like, which one is easier to get your leg up and straight, given that you've got long hamstrings, right? Okay, Utthita Hasta Padangusthasana, leg to the side, or bird of paradise?
Bird of paradise.
Easier?
I think so, yes.
You
Because
think so, why? Which one requires the more range of hamstrings and external rotation and hip abduction and all of those things? Caro and then Tegan.
I actually had my hand up for like a different question. Like I would have said that
it's cool not to know because it's complicated stuff, this.
I'd say in terms of external rotation, it would be the Utthita Hasta Padangusthasana. But like I find it, and also abduction and everything, but I find it a lot more difficult to straighten my leg in Bird of Paradise because of that compression of that bind, and it's like shoulders involved and it's pulling at the shoulders if you straighten your legs. So
okay, so good answer. Let's take it from there. What happens, and this is for everybody, why does, for 99% of people, why are more people able to straighten the leg in Utthita Hasta Padangusthasana as opposed to Bird of Paradise?
So I think, Catherine, this goes back to your previous question, which is more difficult for the hamstring. And I think Bird of Paradise is much more difficult because there's that added bind with the external rotation, and then you're trying to straighten the leg on top of the shoulder.
Okay, so yes, I would totally agree. But why is the bind making it harder? It's a really simple answer. It's not complex. So why does the bind make it harder to straighten the leg in Bird of Paradise? Janine, sorry, Caro, you've got your hand still up. It's gone now. Okay, yeah. Janine, and then Taryn. Can't hear you, Janine.
me now?
I can hear you now, yeah.
Because it's not that easy to externally rotate that hip in that position.
Could be, absolutely. And what else, Taryn?
Couldn't it just be that your arm is pulling up your leg, so that's helping you get there, and it's not the natural flexibility as what it takes in
Exactly.
Paradise?
Exactly. So you've added load, you've got hold of your leg, and because, as Cara said, your shoulders and arms are getting in the way, and as a rule, when we go into that bind, it pulls the leg a load closer to us. It does take out a lot of ability to externally rotate because you're whacking it towards you, and you pulled it closer to you as well. So it's a much harder hamstring pose. So if we were talking about peak pose sequencing, which one would prep for which one of those two poses? Caro?
I mean, the Utthita Hasta for the Bird of Paradise.
For the Bird of Paradise, okay? So it's because Utthita Hasta, Panagustasana, requires less hamstring work than does Bird of Paradise. Does that make sense? Okay. So it's like all of these things get tricky and tricky and tricky, and the best way we can do it is to actually go and do them. So now, the last thing on this hip thing, and then because I want to move on to pelvis next week, all right? I want to talk about hip external rotation in back bends. And talk to me, people. They ought to skip Cara.
Well, since we know that the hip extension is only a little bit and that the external rotation can aid this, there's nothing really wrong with kind of it, when you're in a bridge or in a wheel, having your feet slightly facing out, if that helps you in the pose, and if that does not give you any pain or unwanted feelings in your knees. Like if you feel that your knees are becoming sensitive there, then you can try to keep your feet in. But if you feel like a pinching or whatever in your lower back, you have the option to come lower, but it doesn't have to be that this is related to the external rotation. Okay. As sometimes is said, that it's kind of like squeezing in your SI joint if you externally rotate.
Okay, how much extension, hip extension, do you think we need in back bends? And then Roxy and Claire, I don't know who was first, sorry. How much hip extension do we need in back bends? If we looked at something like Urdhva Dhanurasana wheel and we kind of straightened it out, how far back do you think the leg is being taken?
Not far.
Not far.
No.
The dead?
Well, is it not back at the 30 degrees that it can only go, and the rest will come from other joints?
It is that, but in back bends, unless we're in the most crazy back bends, and then that actually the mobility is coming from the spine, is we're not looking at very much in hip extension. So we don't actually need generally to use hip external rotation to increase range. So why are we using hip external rotation then in back bends? Why does it come up? Firdaus?
I thought that it had something to do with the glutes. And so when you're turning on the glute muscles, then because the glute max is an external rotator and what was the other thing it did? I think it was a hip extender as well. Then it has to do, because it does both things. So I don't know that you can tell it to only do one.
Yes, so this is it. So if you think about yourself standing splits, okay, so and you're keeping your hips level and you've taken your leg up, your back leg up, right? What's taking your leg up? What muscle is taking your leg up?
Glute, hamstring.
Glutes and hamstring, glute max, right? Glute max. So does everybody know that glute max is your big bum muscle? It's like the biggest glute maximus. It's a grand muscle, all right? It takes your leg up. So it takes it up to level, And then we go, oh, okay, we want an actual split splits. Let's take it up even further. We use external rotation, we take it up even further. What muscle is doing that?
Isn't it the psoas, the iliopsoas? No?
It's also the glute max.
It's also glute max. So the best thing that you can do is actually to go and do it and put your hand on your bum and feel it. So if you go down to a personal trainer and you go, I would like a perky bum, please. Can you give me perky bum exercises? All right. They're going to let you do a whole load of external rotation, okay? Hip extension and hip external rotation, because your glute max is also a big external rotator. Okay, so it's powerful muscle. You know, for a muscle to hold, our legs are really heavy. How many people have actually, how many of you, I should say, actually, if you stand up, right, and you just extend your leg out in front of you, right, straight leg. How many of you know, I don't know how many of you have done it, but how many of you know that your quad will cramp like that? For most of you, have you done that movement? Right? If you haven't, please go and do it, because most of you will go, ow, 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 and slap your quad afterwards. But glute max, it doesn't cramp when you take your leg behind you, does it? No. Okay, it's a powerful muscle. So its job is to take your leg up, hip extension, and to turn it slightly out. Okay, so when you go into a back bend, what happens? How do you get up?
External rotation.
Somebody's mumbling, but I don't know who's chatting because the yellow thing didn't move.
It's up with the glutes.
So glutes, sorry, yes, glutes. Okay, all right. So what I want you to do, I'm going to write it down. I want you to try and go up into a bridge, like a little Setu Bandhasana, without using your glutes. Okay. Because what other muscle would take you into hip extension? What's the other muscle that does the work?
The hamstrings.
Hamstrings, yeah, exactly. So that back line. But now we know that bodies don't work in this. There's glute max. Oh no, I'm not glute max anymore. I'm hamstring. We just don't have any connections whatsoever. There's just a stop. That's it. What happens is it works on a fiber level, and you've got gazillions and millions of fibers in your glute max and your hamstring, and they literally blend into one another. Okay, it's not possible to extend your leg, and that's the back bend, without engaging glutes and hamstrings. Does everybody understand that? Because I don't know what you guys have experienced in your teachings. Who's been taught not to turn the feet out or to not use glutes in back bends? Firdous, you, Caro, Roxy, okay, Tegan, okay. So why do you think that was? Firdous?
I think that, like, especially on like lying on your tummy back bends, the idea was to use the muscles of your back instead of like relying on your bum to, like, especially if you have a bigger or stronger bum, like, to do most of the work for you. And yeah, I mean, I actually wanted to ask that because people always say, or not always, but relax your glutes when you like coming up into a locust or any of those, because I think they don't want you to grip on your bum, but I don't know why.
Okay, so can you come up? Look, it depends what you're doing. If you're doing Shalabhasana and you're taking your legs up, or you're doing Shalabhasana where you're almost like a sphinx, you're coming up like that, just the back, for those. Which one?
Yeah, I think more when you're not taking the legs up, because to take the legs up, you have to have your bum working.
Yeah. So do you think you can actually lift up without engaging any glute?
No, I don't think.
You experience it. The best thing is to go and actually experience these things, whether you can actually lift up without engaging glutes, okay? Because then it's the same thing. The spinal muscles engage and go into the glute. There's no point that they go, You know, we're just engaging spine muscles and we're not engaging any of the glute muscles, because glute max starts high, starts high on your back. So but do you think that they do that instruction because they want you to work your back muscles? Okay. So if we wanted to work back muscles, where would we do it without using glute max as a lifter?
Could you not do low cobra?
You could do low cobra, but it's kind of the same thing. Are you talking about with your hands on the ground, Tegan?
So low cobra, toes on the mat, and then hands under the shoulders, and then elbows kind of reaching towards each other.
Okay.
So maybe like lifting a little bit into the knees, but yeah.
You'd still be using, it would still be the same thing. You'd still be using glute max to lift. You just kind of have to. So it'd still be the same thing. Where could we do it where we wouldn't be using glute max ever?
Maybe if you are doing something like forward bending in a standing position, and then just stopping and playing with the different angles, and go into a slight back bend with the upper body as well, but the hip would be in flexion and not in extension.
Exactly. So that's Ava like nails these anatomy things well. So basically, the only way you cannot use glute max is if you're not in hip extension, which means you can't be in a back bend. So it's like, you've got to take out, if you're in hip extension, of course, to different degrees, right? It's like Fido said, if you lift the legs up, then, that's even more hip extension. So glute max is going to have to work. But the minute you're in this shape, glute max, unless somebody's passively put you in the shape, like, I don't know, say you're lying on your tummy and they put loads of bolsters underneath your legs and loads of bolsters underneath your tummy, and you're in a restorative kind of locus or little cobra pose, then glute max is just going to be bullet. But any other time, if it's in that shape, it's going to be working, right? A little bit to contract. But if you're in hip flexion, in another thing, and coming down, then your back muscles are working. What are they working to do in that? If I'm lowering down, what are they working to do, Janine?
Stabilize you.
More than stabilize you. If I've got my arms up, Uttanasana, folding forward, what are they? So I'm lowering down. What are they stopping me from doing?
Falling on your face.
Falling on my face, which is an essential stabilization, okay? So they're working eccentrically, lowering down, and all of your spinal muscles will be working incredibly hard, okay? So that's like a little bit off track. But what I want to explore a little bit more before we go, because we've only got a couple of minutes left, all right, is the people that have been instructed, so for Jo said she's been instructed lying on her tummy with not allowing glutes to be on. And who else has had an experience where they say don't use your glutes or don't turn your legs out in a back bend? I think quite a few of you had your hands up. Caro?
Yeah, I don't have the experience of don't turn on your glutes, but don't turn your feet out cue definitely came up. And if I remember correctly, that was connected to this: if you turn your feet out, or in general, if you externally rotate, also when you're lying on your belly in Shalabhasana or whatever, when you externally rotate, then you're creating less space for your lumbar area, and you're kind of squeezing and might be pinching, and there might be SI joint sensitivity. So that was the input that I got, if I remember correctly.
Yes, Roxy?
For the glutes, I've had that instructed to me a couple times, but it never felt good. It felt like I wanted to squeeze my glutes anyway, so I've just like kept squeezing my glutes in all the back bend. But regarding the feet out, I had a question on Dhanurasana. When you are in bow pose, and when a lot of teachers say don't put your knees out, like keep your knees hip distance apart, because then it pinches your nerve. And I wanted to ask you if that is a correct cueing, or if some people, they can keep their knees out and that doesn't necessarily, I mean, it's not going to like damage anything in the body or hurt them.
Okay, so again, it depends on what we are asking for the person, because if you're in a big Dhanurasana where, you know, you get those people that have just got huge back and they're bringing their feet up to their head, I would say on the whole, there's almost, if you can find a picture with somebody with straight legs that are not externally rotated out, I would love to see it. They would be incredibly mobile. I mean, like what? Because most people take their legs slightly out to the side. Okay, so if we take it into a different range, so okay, so you're in Dhanurasana or Urdhva Dhanurasana, wheel or bow, and the teacher's saying you can't have your knees going out to the side because it's going to. So they're saying you can't externally rotate, right? You can't do that because it's going to pinch your SI joint. What's happening in Baddha Konasana, in butterfly?
Same.
You're lying on your back.
But it's the same. I mean, you're taking your knees out, but maybe you don't have that action of like hip extension where you're pushing up. I don't know. I'm not sure.
So that's it. So if you want somebody to come into Dhanurasana, the only thing I would say is, and then again, this is my personal thing, is if somebody said, my knees hurt, when they're popping out to the side, I'd say, bring them in a bit, and then that will reduce their bow pose. It'll make their bow pose less bowy. And then I would go, do your knees still hurt? No, it's fine. That's your bow for now. Because generally, when people, so does everybody know the pose Vrikshasana? So scorpion pose in Pinchamayurasana. So you're on your forearms, forearm balance, and you take your legs over, and the idea, not in my world, but you put your feet on your head, right? Okay? No one does that, literally, without having their legs in a Baddha Konasana leg. Okay? Because they can't get there. Because the hip extension needs to be more than 30 degrees. So they immediately, I don't know how many of you guys have done it yourself or moved with it, and you watch your legs going out to the side. And it's the same, a lot of you, I'll get to you now, Eva, a lot of you are doing the handstand jumps where you're doing Baddha Konasana butterfly jumps up onto the wall where you're almost in a little bit of a flick back bend, and I haven't heard anybody whinge about their back or their knees or their anything like that. So I don't think it's, I would not instruct to prevent injury, but if somebody said, my knees hurt, I would say, bring them in a little bit. That's what I would say. Sorry, Ava.
Yeah, and for me, it doesn't even make sense that there would be a connection to the lower back, because if we externally rotate, we engage our glutes, which have no anatomical connection to the low back. Like, okay, there is a connection, like there's a connection everywhere in the body, but it's like not that especially I am influencing that part of the joint.
Yes, and what the way I got taught don't do those things was I was never allowed to turn my knees out. You had to do everything hips facing level all over the place. And the instruction was always, if you allow your knees to go, i.e. if you, because no one ever said externally rotate, they just said don't let your knees go out or don't turn your feet out. And then it was always, it will hurt your SIJ, your sacroiliac joint. That was my experience, that it would somehow, by squeezing in your glutes, would hurt my SI joint. That was my experience of it. And then, you know, if you, Emma's obviously she's busy and stuff, but what I know from physios now that they tell me is that if people do have SIJ inflammation, they actually make them work their glutes. So it's like I'm not sure where it came from, but I don't think it's a problem because your body's clever. It knows what it wants to do. It doesn't mean it's not stupid because it's ruled by your brain. So, your brain's going to go, oh, yeah, my knees really hurt a bit and that, but I really want to put my foot on my head. And then you might override that. But your body is going to work in a system to get you to point Z or not. And we just don't want to hurt it too much along the way. Emma. Oh yeah, you can.
So I like, just by a show of hands, has anybody ever had SI joint pain? No. Okay, Cara. It's like extension actually brings on your pain. So I guess, yeah, and I agree with you, Catherine. We will make you work on your glute strength. And usually with SI pain, it's never both at the same time. There's always one. Yeah. And there's always this imbalance between the two. And that's why I would make you work on glutes. But if I had a patient with SI pain, I get SI pain quite a lot. I don't go into big back bends because it brings on my pain for sure. And what helps me is not to externally rotate because I don't want to go deeper into the extension because that brings on my pain.
Exactly. So that is the thing. So it will bring on pain. I've had so many people throughout the years with SIJ pain, no more than any other pain, shoulder pain. And I've never been able to predict when. I mean, I've had people where they've had it post-pregnancy and that anything they do is a problem. So if they go into a warrior one where the back leg is externally rotated, it hurts. So people always go beyond having to worry about instructions in back bends because they don't go to those places. They might do a crescent lunge with the back knee bent and it's almost a slight posterior tuck of the pelvis to not niggle anything in those areas. So most people don't have SIJ pain and we don't need to be preventative of it in a back bend. If somebody comes afterwards and goes, that really niggled, I didn't like it, what do we say?
Don't do it.
Don't do it. Back off a little bit. Don't go, don't make your bow, don't try and touch your foot on your head in bow pose. Maybe do it with no hands where you're actually using a whole load of muscle to go up. All right. I think we are finished. Yes. Okay, guys, any quick questions or we done? Yes, brains fried, I can see. Okay, all right, I'm going to give you some instructions for Wednesday. I need you to do some things because where I can tell whether you understand it. Okay, have a lovely couple of days.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks so much,
Bye.
Catherine. Bye, everyone.
Lovely day.
Bye,
everyone.
Quiet.
For a change.
Not so much.
Cheers.
Bye.